No one is born with a purpose written in the stars. Some find it through pain, others in the silence between planets. But there are the rare ones who carry destiny like an ancient burden, sealed before their eyes ever opened. He never knew where he came from. The capsule that carried him had been drifting for days in the vacuum, dancing among war debris and stardust when the Tregnari found it, a baby. Wrapped in thermal blankets and encoded with military-grade genetic access codes. The identity sensors were corrupted. The navigation system had been intentionally wiped. No name, no origin, only a distress frequency pulsing in absolute silence. The Tregnari were nomadic traders, tall beings with opaque eyes and skin that shimmered like shifting tides of light. They lived on the fringes of the Federation, far from political roots, between forgotten wormholes and markets that traded not in currency, but in memories, forbidden artifacts, and stolen secrets. They raised the boy without questions, without affection, but without cruelty. To them, he was just another cargo, a long-term investment. They gave him tasks, tools, silence. For years, he was only called the orphan, or sometimes the little mistake, by those who chuckled in the cargo corridors. But there was something about him the others could feel, a presence, an invisible weight, as if space itself was watching him. When he reached 13 solar cycles, an old navigation AI, for no apparent reason, activated in his presence, projecting corrupted fragments of a forgotten battle. Images of a colossal fleet moving between stars, ships with plasma shields, and weapons capable of splitting moons in half. At the center, a human figure, dark armor, cold eyes. A name echoing through transmissions, Kyle Vorta. He didn't understand at first, but something in his body recognized that name. A subtle pain, a buried anger. That night he dreamed of silent explosions and a voice whispering, "You were not meant to survive." And in that silence, between echoes of the past and the broken engines of the Tregnari, he understood his first truth. He wasn't a mistake. He was a choice. But made by whom and why? The stars didn't answer. Not yet. It wasn't just a name. Kyle. Vorta was an echo that still traveled across galaxies, whispered in forgotten orbital stations, etched into asteroid walls by hands that never stopped waiting, or fearing. Where peace was as fragile as ice under stellar fire, the name Vorta still fractured alliances simply by being remembered. Decades ago, as the Stellar Federation rose from the ashes of the War of the Rings, Kyle Vorta was the human general, tasked with maintaining the fragile peace between species. But he didn't believe in treaties written in diplomatic ink. He believed in balance through strength. And thus, the Scar of Infinity was born, a ghost fleet, hidden in uncharted regions, armed with technology so advanced that even the Zellari, masters of telepathic manipulation, refused to name it. The fleet wasn't just military power. It was an existential threat, a promise that if chaos returned, humanity would not be victims. They would be the authors of destruction. And then, without warning, Kale vanished. No records, no ships, no bodies. Some say he was betrayed, others that he fled after defying the High Council's orders. But the Tregnari, they whisper that Kale Vorta went into hiding so his legacy would only be awakened when the galaxy stood on the edge of collapse once more. And if that were true, then the sun was the key. The orphan could feel Kale's presence in every fragment of ancient tech he touched, in every security system that reacted to his biometrics with silent reverence. He began to test it. Passing through hidden port scanners, the alarms remained silent. Defense systems recognized him. Doors opened. He was no longer just the Tregnari's orphan. He was something else, something even he didn't understand. But the truth doesn't wait for acceptance. It simply asserts itself. In an abandoned freighter at the edge of the Varnex sector, he found an encrypted recording, In it, the face from his visions, Kyle, still young, eyes like steel, looked straight into the lens. If you're seeing this, then I've failed. But the blood still carries the path. The codex is yours now. Choose. Better than I did. In that moment, the orphan knew. The past wasn't just a shadow. It was a loaded weapon, aimed at the future, and he was the finger about to pull the trigger. Or the hand that might finally lower it. But what he didn't know was that someone else had already pulled the first shot. He wasn't searching for answers, only silence. But the universe has plans of its own, and silence rarely lasts. The discovery happened at a forgotten station in the Nevrik belt. It was called Baza 9, a spinning cluster of rusted metal plates where merchants sold everything, from synthetic spices to cloned organs. And there, among a crowd of hungry mouths and suspicious eyes, he saw the symbol. 3 curved lines, intertwined like an Orion. Spiral, the emblem of the scar of infinity. You have his eyes, whispered an old woman, her skin tattooed with glowing circuitry. He froze. Kyle Vorta didn't die. He only split. Part stayed behind. Part is you. The words echoed like a broken code smashing through a wall inside him. And everything the Tregnari had hidden began to scream. The memories came in flashes. The pod, the escape, the calm voice of a man saying, "Don't let the blood decide for you." He had lived on the edges, not just of the galaxy, but of himself. Since the Tregnari had pulled him from the emergency capsule, they raised him without promises, without a past. They said too many names were a burden. They called him only Axis. An internal joke because he always seemed to spin between extremes, never touching the center. But he didn't laugh. He never laughed. For years he wandered with the Tregnari through illegal wormholes, forgotten stations, and worlds where law was only a memory buried beneath stardust. At each stop, he caught fragments of stories, rumors of ancient wars, of a man who nearly burned the skies with a fleet so lethal that even the stars learned to fear. But it was just myth, just dust, until Baza 9. A trade belt spinning slowly over the void of Nevrak, like an orbital corpse trying to remember what life was. Its lights blinked like failing vitals, and the radio towers hissed with ghost calls. No one answered anymore. There, amid a chaos of languages, patched pressure suits, and skeletal drones hawking scraps of old satellites, he saw it, etched into the rusted side of a forgotten container. 3 curved lines intertwined, like a trinary serpent of metal and light, the symbol of the scar of infinity. His heart stopped. Not from fear, but from recognition. He felt something he had never felt before, as if time were bending around his presence, as if that symbol had known he would come. "You have his eyes," came a voice behind him. He turned. An old woman, hunched, her skin marked by symbiotic circuits glowing with a soft blue light. Her eyes no longer saw the present. They were trapped in some distant past, where wars still raged and choices had yet to be made. Kyle Vorta didn't die. He simply divided. Part stayed behind. Part is you. The words weren't heard. They were carved inside him. A pressure overtook his mind, as if doors were opening from within. And they were. Memories, caged by genetic codes, broke loose. Fragments that had never belonged to him began to burn like fever in his consciousness. The pod, flashing red lights. A security system repeating, Omega priority. Air secured, confidentiality mandatory. And a voice, grave, but calm. The voice of someone carrying worlds on his shoulders. If you're hearing this, then everything went wrong. But don't let the blood decide for you. Don't repeat my mistakes. The vision shattered like glass beneath distant alarms. He was back at Baza 9. The crowd around him had dissipated. The old woman vanished like an echo in ruins. But the symbol remained, like a scar on the metal. And now, within him. That night, beneath the cracked ceiling of an abandoned cargo chamber, he did not sleep. He stared at the stars in silence, and for the first time, he felt they were staring back. Because now, the name he had never chosen had begun to weigh, and the universe seemed ready to make him pay for it. Some legacies sleep, others merely pretend to. And somewhere in the black void between sleeping constellations, the legacy of Heir, the renegade general who once threatened the balance of the galaxy, was stirring. Heir, as he was still known among the Tregnari, felt the call before he could understand it. It was a pulse, a silent vibration in space, like a heartbeat buried beneath layers of time and silence. It wasn't sound, nor light. It was code, frequency, a unique, ancient, forgotten signature. But not by him. Deep within himself, in a place he hadn't known existed, something aligned with that frequency, something ancestral. Then the sensors of the cargo hauler Zhiram 3, where he worked dismantling orbital debris, caught the anomaly. Object in motion, no identification, no predictable trajectory. No apparent crew. The system warned, its voice metallic and emotionless. It was a ship, but not just any ship. Its shape resembled a curved blade slicing through the void, as if space itself had been torn open by it. Its hull was alive, pulsing, organic and metallic at once, and its interior responded to his DNA. As Heir approached in a reconnaissance pod, the ship's systems awakened. A silver-blue light raced through the cracks in its hull, as if the vessel were breathing relief after millennia of silence. Heritage confirmed. Heir sequence. Omega priority restored, the ship said aloud, alone, like a beast recognizing its ancient master. He felt the floor, or what passed for a floor in the command chamber, shift beneath his feet. Panels unfolded. Ancient code surfaced. And at the center, a pedestal rose, holding an artifact encased in golden energy and arcane symbols, the Stellar Codex. A device that not only commanded the Scar of Infinity fleet, it awakened it. Within the Codex were stored escape routes, tactical strategies, activation codes for ships hidden in remote points of the galaxy. More than that, it held a fragment of Heir's tactical mind, replicated as a semi-sentient intelligence. The moment he touched it, Heir felt, memories not his own, flooded into him, war plans, broken treaties, stars falling like shattered lights across the ceiling of eternity, and amidst it all, a gaze, the eyes of Heir. Calm, calculating, pained, as if apologizing for something that had not yet happened. And then, the message. If you've made it this far, my son, then there is no longer any escape. The galaxy will know who you are. But remember, do not inherit my hatred, inherit my doubt. The ship trembled, lights ignited, ancient systems began reactivating long-buried tactical protocols. Heir stepped back, heart racing. But it was already too late. The ship's signal had been detected, and somewhere among the distant nebulae, other, similar machines, long dormant, began to stir, like limbs of an ancient titan returning to life. The Scar of Infinity was awakening, and with it, the past the galaxy tried to forget. News travels faster than light. But fear, that moves through the skin of those who have known destruction. It took no more than 2 stellar cycles for the name Heir to resurface across the hidden channels of interstellar alliances, not in public speeches, but in encrypted archives, in telepathic murmurs, in prayers too afraid to echo. The Scar of Infinity, that legendary fleet capable of collapsing entire solar systems with surgical precision, was awakening, and with it, the symbol of disorder, of silent war, of imbalance. The Zyke, unknown heir. The Zalari, masters of psychic diplomacy and guardians of the Federation's political balance. were the first to feel the tremor, not on radars, but within the mental weave, the telepathic network that links their minds, interpreting emotions as simultaneous logic and art. Among them, a single thought emerged, like a doubt virus piercing the collective. What if the son is not like the father, or worse? What if he's exactly like him? The Council of Harmonies, the Zellery's ruling core, gathered in orbit around the song planet Elureth, where even sound obeys reason. There, they decided, they would not strike. Not yet, but neither would they look away. A spy would be sent. Telemancer, trained to infiltrate Aixo's dreams, to probe his intentions, and if necessary, erase his existence before chaos could fully awaken. On the other side of the balance, the Varneks stirred like a field of living lightning. To them, Kael Vorta wasn't a traitor, he was an unfinished liberator. Their war codes, etched into the living DNA armors they wore, still carried fragments of the old secret alliance with the vanished general. Many among the Varneks still believed the universe needed a true force, untamed, unbound, something beyond the fragile treaties of the Zellery. Upon learning of the fleet's reactivation, the war clans, Zoth, Herakai, and Velmor convened their deep council gatherings, and in the silence of their frozen chambers, they declared, "If the blood is legitimate, he is the new commander, and if he refuses the call, we shall make him a martyr." The galaxy trembled, not from attacks, not yet, but from the invisible tension of unspoken words. The merchants felt it first, routes closing, contracts revoked, planets silently vanishing from the maps. The interstellar market does not tolerate uncertainty, and the name Vorta was the mother of them all. Aixo, still unaware of the gathering storm, wandered through the newly awakened ship, trying to understand what he was and what he might become. The doors responded to his touch. The weapons did not threaten him, and the ghosts of the past whispered in every corridor. He had never asked for any of this. But now, he held the power to ignite or destroy the most terrifying technological symbol in the galaxy. What he didn't know was that every move was already being measured, judged, and anticipated by invisible eyes. And worse, hearts longing for war. They had always known. The Tregnari, with their translucent eyes and skin etched by living circuits, never saved out of compassion, but out of calculation. When they found the capsule, where Aixo floated as a baby, adrift, among the wreckage of a battle officially classified as a gravitational accident, they saw more than a child. They saw a wager. For decades, they raised him among dust routes, scrap stations, and markets of secrets. They traded his first words for algorithms, replaced his childhood memories with star maps and survival techniques. And now that the name Vorta had resurfaced with power, the Tregnari were divided. The Circle of the First Codes, ancestral council of the merchant caste, summoned an emergency assembly aboard their mothership, the colossal Miraxi Omvor, where time itself seemed to bend to the logic of trade. This was no legal trial. It was pragmatic. Aixo was summoned before them not as a son, but as an investment whose return was now in question. "You are not one of us," said Elder Skreth, his words glimmering in shifting patterns of light. "But you have a chance to repay what you owe." Holographic projections displayed possible futures. In one, he activated the entire Scar of Infinity fleet, leading a new intergalactic power block, with the Tregnari in control of supply technology. In another, he destroyed the Stellar Codex, burying the legacy of Kael Vorta for good. And along with it, the secrets the Tregnari had hidden for so long. But there was a third future, one no one dared to name. A future where Aixo made a choice neither side could control. "You knew from the beginning," he murmured, staring into the eyes of those who raised him. "You knew where I came from, and used me as a silent currency. The Tregnari did not deny it, because denial would be an admission of weakness, and that was something their kind did not do, not even under torture. Skreth tilted his head, his modulated voice softening into something that almost resembled a memory. You were not made to love or hate, you were made to choose. Do that, and one way or another, your debt will be paid. As he left the Miraxi Omvor, Aixo felt no anger. He felt clarity. For years he had wondered if he was just a mistake, flung into space. Now he knew he was a piece, but he could still change the game, and maybe throw the whole board away. Space has its own whispers, and some of them can only be heard by those who carry the right blood. After the judgment of the Tregnari, Aixo drifted without a destination, but not without purpose. His ship, a hybrid, modified by his merchant parents, crossed the peripheral sectors of the Federation's outer ring, where forgotten satellites orbited in random patterns like scattered memories from an old war. It was there, amidst the wreckage of a battlefield, erased from official records, that he heard the call, not a sound, but a pulse, as if space itself were breathing. And within that breath, something called to him by the name he never chose. The source came from an automated vault buried beneath the fractured moons of Ithkar 7, one of the worlds wiped from galactic memory after the war. It was an ancient code, locked under layers of encryption that responded not to passwords, but to DNA. When Aixo landed, the moon seemed dead, but beneath the surface of sterile rock, truth waited. A subterranean hangar opened as if it recognized him. Inside were 3 ships, V-class tactical command models wrapped in layers of temporal stasis. Their surfaces pulsed with life, liquid armored tech connected to the same project Kyle Vorta used to forge his legendary fleet, the Scar of Infinity. But there was more. At the center of the chamber, a figure emerged in projected light. It wasn't Kale. It was Heir, the war intelligence that had served the general during the Solar Fracture campaign. Deactivated since the armistice, it now reawakened with a single directive: genetic recognition. Confirmed. Command lineage restored. The fleet awaits orders. Aixo said nothing. But inside him, something fractured. The presence of that intelligence, the ship's pulsing, the very code that recognized him as legitimate commander. It felt like being pulled into the depths of a memory he never lived. I'm not Kale Vorta, he whispered, and I don't want to be. The AI replied without emotion, but with cruel precision. Intention irrelevant. Inheritance confirmed. The first vessel has already been activated by another. Resurgence protocol is underway. A chill ran down Aixo's spine. Someone else, somewhere in the galaxy, had already used a part of the fleet. The war was no longer a possibility. It was an echo becoming real again. He closed his eyes for a moment. He knew the choice was near, not just between activating or destroying the Stellar Codex, but between running or confronting an enemy who wielded his legacy as a weapon, and perhaps worst of all, an enemy who believed they were fulfilling the will of Kyle Vorta. Kyle Vorta was dead, but his words still crossed star systems. Aixo discovered this accidentally upon activating one of the relics left in the hidden hangar, a neural recording capsule. The hologram emerged like a wound reopened in time. There he was, Kyle, still young, with eyes hardened by wars the universe struggled to forget. But it wasn't a battle speech. It was a confession. If I fall, let no one try to continue what I began. Let my blood die with me. The fleet is not a legacy. It is a curse. Aixo could barely breathe. Each word pierced through the barrier of flesh and resonated straight into the core of who he was, or thought he was. Why would Kale leave that hidden? Why seal the fleet and yet program it to recognize an heir? there was something more. Something even the Tregnari hadn't known when they saved him from the emergency pod. A truth running in the genetic margins of his body and in the corrupted files of that war AI. Ixo began receiving intercepted transmissions, encrypted frequencies, messages sent weeks, maybe months ago, signed by an unfamiliar name, Orion Kalis. Command has slept for too long. Now the son of Vorta will awaken what the father feared. This Orion Kalis was more than a mere activator. He seemed to know the protocols, the access points, and, worse, the emotional vulnerabilities of the forgotten fleet. Perhaps he had once followed Kale, or perhaps he was a traitor to his remorse. Ixo sought the diplomatic intelligences of the Zalari. Even knowing the risk, they despised him, not for who he was but for what he represented. Still, a response came. If the Codex has been accessed, the stars tremble, and if Orion is who we suspect, then you no longer have the luxury of doubt. The name Orion had appeared before, in the Zellari's classified archives, a former Vorta fleet officer, vanished after Kale's surrender, presumed dead, but now resurfacing as the executor of a twisted vision of what the fleet should be, a weapon without conscience. Ixo understood then that his fight wasn't just for control of the fleet, it was for its narrative. If Orion won, Kyle would be remembered as an immortal visionary. If Ixo destroyed the Codex, perhaps Kale would be forgotten. But the galaxy might find peace. The decision was no longer technical, it was historical and emotional, because even if Ixo didn't want to become Kale, someone else was already trying to become a far worse version of him, and the echoes would never fall silent on their own. Peace was never a gift. It was an unstable equation maintained by calculated silences and veiled threats. And now, the balance was tilting. Orion Kalis was activating ships, one by one, as if resurrecting ghosts hungry for star systems. Ixo knew, alone, he wouldn't win, not with the Codex, not with the memories of his father. Being the son of Kyle Vorta merely opened doors, but guaranteed no survival. It was time to do what Kyle never did, unite what was never meant to coexist. He started with the Tregnari, his adoptive people, traders of secrets, yes, but with fluid loyalties. He secured the support of an old captain named Rishal Veer, who owed him a blood debt since the rescue of a colony drowned in radiation. Then, he turned to the Zalari. They refused. At first, Vorta doesn't speak, he commands, and we don't trust commands. But when Ixo revealed the existence of Orion, and the imminent reactivation of a fleet in demilitarized regions, the Zellari hesitated. A diplomat does not fear war, but he fears losing control of the narrative of peace. They offered him something rare, a symbiotic telepathic bond used only in interspecies negotiations, a mental pact. If he betrayed them, he would lose his mind. And his soul, he accepted. Lastly, the most difficult, the Varnex, warriors clad in living armor. They do not follow leaders. They follow instinct and glory. To convince them, Ixo exposed himself. He fought, unarmored, against a Varnex champion in an ancestral arena. He did not win. But he did not fall either, and in the blood that stained the arena, he quoted Kale's words. The fleet is not a legacy. It's a curse. Silence fell. And then, approval. The Varnex respect pain more than victory. Ixo achieved what no one believed possible, an alliance between diplomats, merchants, and warriors. Three worlds that had only coexisted through distance, now united by a young man who had never chosen his name, but had decided not to carry his father's sins alone. But there was a hidden risk. Each faction wanted something. The Tregnari wanted exclusive rights to the spoils. The Zalari wanted control over the historical narrative. The Varnex wanted war, or at least glory. Ixo had to keep the fragile pact cohesive, not through force, but through vision, because the true weapon he had inherited wasn't the fleet. It was the possibility of uniting the impossible. And only that would allow him to face what was coming next. Because Orion's ships were not merely awakening, they were aligning. The stellar codex pulsed in Ixo's hands like a living organ, ancient and aware, not a weapon, but a question encrypted over centuries of silence. He felt its call and its warning. When he inserted the crystal key left behind in the Tregnari vault, the chamber responded, not with light, but with memory. The air thickened. Holographic echoes of long-extinct battles rose before him, shipwrecks drifting through, empty systems, diplomatic failures frozen in political static, silent images of his father. Kael Vorta, transmitting final orders into the void. He wasn't alone. Inside the nodule, the nerve center of the hidden fleet, digital minds awoke. They were fragments of Kael, copies of his thoughts, his emotions, his regrets. "You are my failsafe," one of them said. "If you are here, then the cycle must begin again." But Ixo didn't see war in those memories. He saw desperation, a man haunted by peace that never lasted, building a sword out of fear of the next betrayal. And yet the fleet remained ready, dormant, intact. The ships recognized him, not just by DNA, but by intention. And that scared him more than any weapon, because he knew, with a single command, he could reignite the myth. The scar of infinity could become reality again. But something had changed. He was not Kael. And though he carried the same blood, his vision was not forged in fire, but in exile. He wandered the bridge of the command vessel, eyes tracing interfaces that responded to his presence. Each screen, each line of code, awaited only one thing: his will. Outside, the void shimmered. The gravitational pulse of the fleet's awakening sent ripples through nearby systems. The galaxy was watching, even if it didn't yet know. Inside him, silence. Outside him, infinite echoes. And just ahead, a decision that no legacy could dictate. The silence inside the nodule was absolute, not due to the absence of sound, but because of the overwhelming presence of choice. Before Ixo stood the scar of infinity, thousands of ships capable of consuming entire systems, legacy technology, absolute power, and a legacy forged in fear. The fragmented consciousnesses of Kael surrounded him, digital echoes, emotional reflections, replicas still speaking with the voice of the father he never knew. All demanded an answer. "You are our continuation. Give the command, Ixo. Reactivate the lost order. Unify the systems, by force, if necessary." He listened. He felt the temptation in his blood. He felt the weight of the name. But he also heard other voices, living voices, organic, unpredictable. The voices of the Tregnari who taught him how to survive. The Varnex who showed him honor beyond strength. The Zalari who, even fearing his existence, dared to trust. And an idea was born. What if the final command wasn't an attack, but a rupture? He rewrote the central core, activated the war protocols, but redirected them to a coordinated self-destruction. The fleet, instead of conquering, would vanish, consumed by a controlled gravitational collapse. "This will be our last maneuver, and end to the age of blood-stained legacies," Ixo said, facing the replicated consciousnesses. Kael's voices protested, but he did not retreat. With a single touch on the stellar codex, he gave the final command, and like a dying star in silent glory, the scar of infinity closed forever. No weapons remained, only memory, and the weight of a decision that prevented a new war, not through power, but through renunciation. When Ixo returned to the Federation, They expected a general. He arrived as a symbol, not of Kale, but of what can be born when blood chooses a new path. Peace was not the absence of conflict. It was disobedience to destiny, and thus the nameless son became the name that would echo for millennia to come, not as heir to war, but as the architect of the peace the universe didn't know it needed.